So welcome to this BIA member webinar on the outcome of the EU referendum. I hope this will give you a good update on what we've done thus far and what the next steps are going forwards. So as many of you will know, the BIA has taken a strong position on this issue for some time, and at the beginning of the year we, with the board's agreement and advice, took the view that the EU membership brings net benefits to the UK and advocated that position forcefully through the campaign. In terms of what work we did, lots of detailed written submissions to parliamentary inquiries about what this meant for the sector. That also led to oral evidence to both the House of Lords and the House Commons Science and Technology Select Committees, and we're the only trade association mentioned in those reports, which were issued shortly before the referendum. We also organised five private round tables with Life Science Minister George Freeman, which preceded rallies for Remain around the country, and thank you to those of you who took part in them in Oxford, London, Birmingham, Cambridge and Manchester. That we organised the private round tables, and then people walked to the rallies for Remain, which were co-hosted, co-located, I should say, and some of them attracting significant regional and local media coverage. More media coverage was obtained through the letters which were jointly signed by many leading executives from life science companies in the FT in February. We did one jointly with a broader community in May, and then reprised that in the Times at the behest of the campaign in the week before the election, which was a cross-sectoral piece. So thank you to those of you who took part, and we got significant media and trade coverage as a result of this during the campaign. However, of course, ultimately the country decided to vote to leave the EU, and this is what we've done since the vote. We issued a statement immediately on the Friday, saying that although this wasn't the outcome that we wanted, that we were a resilient community unfazed by new challenges, staffed by great teams used to working in a global environment, and that the fundamentals of the UK remain strong. But now several key issues for our sector are in flux, and these included the regulation of medicine, access to the single market and talent, intellectual property, and the precise nature of how the future relationship of the UK with Europe would work. We said this will require detailed and dispassionate thinking, and we'll make our and our members' expert advice available to government and its key agencies as we work through these complex issues. And we remain committed to creating a third global cluster for life sciences. So we've continued with the rational and expert approach to this, and I hope we're flagging the issues that matter to you in terms of your company. Thinking about how we're likely to feel about this process for the next few weeks and months, I think we'll see three periods. The period of shock, which I think many of us are in at the moment, and certainly the country seems to be in. A period of negotiation, which will follow, and then that will lead us to a future state. I don't think in timescales terms this will happen quickly. I think the shock is likely to last for a long period of time. Certainly if you think about the economic impacts, the negotiation could be any number of years depending on the nature of the outcome of that. And then we'll think about the future state, which could again take some time to bed in, particularly for the more complex areas. I think we've seen the immediate economic shock in terms of the run on the pound, the stock market down. We've definitely seen the political shock in the resignation of the Prime Minister, the Conservative leadership that's upon us. Whether there'll be a new election, who knows, and ramifications in Scotland with the First Minister thinking that a second referendum for independence there will become highly likely. And we've seen the unfortunate, I think, personal cost of this on individuals and teams within our sector. You may well have felt them in the mood in your own organisations. I think we're starting to see that in terms of the potential view of the sector and view of the UK as a result of this. However, I think we're thinking about this, and I'd encourage you to think about this as an emotional process, very similar to a grief process. Most of the sector was very strongly for Remain, and I don't think expected the result to come out as it did. So I think we'll see people in denial, people who are angry, people who are bargaining, people who are depressed, and perhaps we need to get to a state of acceptance as speedily and quickly as we can, but I realise that that's a challenge and not straightforward, but that's the way we're thinking about it. And in terms of the approach that we're taking, we are accepting the democratic will of the British people, not the outcome we wanted, but we accept it. I think it's important that we reassure on the fundamentals. The fundamentals of bioscience are strong. We are a resilient community, an entrepreneurial community. We're used to setbacks. We're also used to being unfazed by new challenges, and we're on a very strong base. The pipeline of science is very strong. The pipeline of products is very strong. The financing position over the last couple of years is stronger than it's been in a while. And we have great management teams which are used to working in a global environment. So we have a great base to work from. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't some challenges ahead, and we need to minimise those and work through those as best we can. And those are the areas that are in flux, particularly regulation, IP, future relationship with the UK and Europe, and what that means for people who work in our communities. Pugac Concilium have a methodology for looking at what are the key factors that underpin a successful bioscience ecosystem, and this is a global view that they look at, and they look at various elements of policy that make a difference: regulatory environment, the market incentives, the intellectual property scene, the R&D infrastructure, human capital, the rule of law, and tech transfer frameworks. And I just mapped onto this which of these are fundamentally affected as a result of the vote on the vote to leave the EU. And if you look at it, I think broadly 3 out of 7 are pretty fundamentally affected. The impact on regulatory environment is going to be profound, and we need to work out what that's going to be. Human capital, I think we're seeing the impact on staff and thinking about teams, many of whom are recruited from around the EU and beyond. And there are questions, I think, in the midterm around the intellectual property system and what this means, particularly for the unified patent. But equally, I think it's important that some of the other things aren't affected. R&D infrastructure is not desperately affected by this. The market incentives in the NHS haven't changed. Perhaps the drop in the pound has some impact. Tech transfer frameworks remain the same, unaffected by this. And the rule of law is obviously, except for the most extreme ends of this, unaffected, and certainly in the short term, not affected. So I think that there is some areas which are affected, but many which are not by this vote, and it's important to remember that. We've been lucky enough to work with PwC, and this is their slide from before the discussion about what type of future format we might have. I'm sure people are getting up to speed with this now. You know, are we going to have the Norway option? Are we going to have the Swiss option? Are we going to have an area where no access agreement in terms of the access to the single market, a more WTO model? Could we have a free trade agreement with the EU? It's hard to know. Some people even go as far as to think that something of the in scenario could be retained through a second election. It's not an area that we have paid great stead by, but I think it's as yet unclear which of these options we will go down. But this is certainly the discussion that's starting to be had, and we're starting to see the Conservative leadership contenders position themselves against their model of which out do they want. And until we know which of those ones we want, it's hard to know what this impact it has in terms of trade policy or shaping EU regulations. I think we are still looking at this, and probably the two factors you've got to consider are: will we try and go for some? Will the government try and advocate for a position which allows for free movement of people, or will they try and advocate for something which limits immigration or has controls over immigration? And whether that is possible to be done whilst maintaining access to the single market. And I think that's probably the discussion that we're going to see going through the next weeks and months. Our issues, in a sense, fall off the bottom of that discussion. So rapidly, we've seen the markets down, the pound down, and some uncertainty. We've seen European leaders call for the UK to get on with it, invoke Article 50 and get going. We've seen calls for a second independence referendum in Scotland. We've seen the Conservative leadership contest begin with Theresa May, Michael Gove, and others being lead candidates. We've seen the Labour Party go through a period of recrimination, and potentially we will see a leadership contest there. And we've seen others argue that there's a role for Parliament to or have a look at this to potentially, or a legal challenge to look at the impact of the referendum. I don't put great store by this. I think it's, but I think it is an important element of the political context in the next period of time. In the next period of time, there is a Ministerial Industry Strategy Group meeting chaired by George Freeman next week, and I think what we'll see there is the establishment of a life science task force to deal with the plans for Brexit, which are being formed and will play a leading role in that. This Thursday at Parliament Day, we're fortunate enough to have lots of CEOs come in and engage with many from the worlds of Whitehall and Westminster as to the way forward, and I will put together thoughts and a position for the board, which is meeting at the end of July, where we'll take stock and work out what we're going to do going forward. We now know that in terms of the political timetable, we'll have a new Prime Minister in early September. Party conference season will be upon us then, and who knows whether we'll be in a discussion as a country with the European Union about the nature of the out that we'll have by then. I hope that the Life Science Task Force will have provided for the Prime Minister as he arrives, new Prime Minister as he or she arrives in early September, with thoughts and a playbook for what it is that the life science sector needs, and that's really the immediate task over the summer. And we'll be providing further communication and insight into this at the BIA Bioscience Forum, which is a date in your diary for the 20th of October. So, I think in summary, the key things to remember are we're still in the EU, and until we are not, and that's at least months away before we trigger Article 50, and the thought process is that an Article 50 process would take at least a couple of years, so nothing is going to move very immediately. Our key thing is to make sure that our sector's voice is heard on key issues which are wider issues than simply our sector. What happens to people, and how do we ensure the free movement of talent to staff and deliver the offer our firms, and vitally, how do we make sure we have access to the single market, and what exactly are the trading arrangements for that. Those are obviously macro issues that are caught up in a much broader debate, and I think we will need to follow that in the political debate that will follow in the coming months. I think also I'm keen that we inject some dispassionate detail on key sector issues which have been overlooked in the run-up to the referendum. What's going to happen about the regulation of medicines, and I think the future of the EMA, how that operates, is something that we'll need to get into some detail with. We're lucky to have an expert working group in forms of our advisory group on regulation to be able to help us on that. I think access to EU funding schemes and collaboration and what that means for Horizon 2020 and other collaborative schemes is vitally important for our sector, and we should work closely to make sure that there is sensible ways forward for that. There we'll work closely with our colleagues in the science community already very concerned about this issue. And I think we need to keep a weather eye on IP and the patents ecosystem, particularly the development of the unitary patent. And again, I'm lucky to be able to lean on the experience of our Intellectual Property Advisory Committee, who are able to give us great expert insight into that. I think the Life Science Task Force, led by George Freeman, which will take a leading role in, will be the vehicle for the delivery of the blueprint to the incoming Prime Minister. That's the key vehicle and the key document and the key process that we need to be involved in over the next 8 weeks. I'm sure I will be able to communicate with you developments along that line, and if there is opportunities for engagement on that. So I hope that gives you a good summary. I am keen as ever to make sure that your views and comments are well regarded as the BIA continues to advocate on your behalf. I've been fortunate to talk to many of you over the last week or so. I think I'm picking up your concerns about your people, your concerns about confidence in the sector, and I think that's a very important thing, and I'm keen to make sure that we're resilient on that. I think the other elements that are coming through are some of these more detailed concerns on reg and IP, and I think we're on top of those. So this is a fluid situation. I hope this has briefly given you an update as to where we're at in a structured way, and you can see that the Life Science Council gives our sector a good way of ensuring that our views are at the centre of thinking for an incoming government and Prime Minister as they are developed over the summer. With that, many thanks, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.